And good evening to you. I'm Natasha Zubes in for Marnie Hughes tonight. We are closely tracking this breaking news right now. The FBI has executed a search warrant at former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. The former president confirming the raid in a press release obtained by NewsNation, saying the FBI even broke into his safe. Now, of course, Trump is under investigation by the Department of Justice and the FBI. Both have declined to comment. The circumstances of the search are still not clear at this hour. I do want to bring in correspondent Kelly Meyer live for us in Washington tonight with what we know right now. Kelly?
Hey, Natasha, well, like you said, we received this statement from former President Trump calling this, quote, dark times for our nation, saying that the FBI raided his Mar-a-Lago home. That's in Palm Beach in Florida. He said that his Mar-a-Lago home was, quote, under siege, raided, and occupied by what he calls a large group of FBI agents. He also says, as you mentioned, they broke into his safe. Now, Trump didn't say why the FBI was searching his home, and he wasn't in Florida at this time. Again, the Justice Department isn't commenting on this either. Natasha?
All right, Kelly, thank you. And I do want to bring in my colleague, Leland Vittert, host of On Balance. Leland, what do you make of the timing of all of this?
First thing, I think you said well off the top, what do we know, which is precious little here. And that may be the first thing to start. Timing of this, Justice Department policy, not to announce major investigations, not to announce indictments within about 90 days of an election. We are awfully close, if not right there, when it comes to a midterm. Timing very important, but I think process also remarkable in that if you are to believe the White House, that they had no idea about this, and also just from an idea of how this was going to get out, that they had to know that President Trump was going to say something. The FBI showing up at Mar-a-Lago is not like raiding a towing company on the south side of Chicago. Right. This was going to leak, and the fact that the Justice Department, which says they're trying to regain the trust of the American people, have not said anything, says an enormous amount about a lack of understanding about where a lot of the country is when it comes to the DOJ and when it comes to the FBI.
Well, and what do we know about these 15 boxes so far?
Well, again, nothing. And more importantly, we have not independently confirmed that that's what they were after. Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, one of the best reporters in Trump world, says they were after these 15 boxes that the president took with him of classified information when he was leaving office. And there's always a discussion between former presidents and the National Archives about what is privileged information, what is subject to executive privilege, what should be released, what can be released, on and on and on. And President Trump says that effectively, I guess, that he wanted to keep these boxes with him. There has been reporting that there has been a discussion ongoing between the National Archives and the president over documents. If you put all of these pieces together, you could come to the conclusion, although we could not say it fully, that these are the boxes that they had been talking about, and that eventually the FBI or the National Archives got a little irritated, and they decided to then go get them themselves. We don't know whether these boxes contain information that are beyond simply an accusation of mishandling classified information, or if they are contents or documents that would relate to other investigations into President Trump. That's probably the biggest question we have right now.
Well, and former President Trump is calling this prosecutorial misconduct. Is it? Is that true?
Well, in his mind, it is. That would eventually be probably for a judge to decide at some point down the line.
Certainly unprecedented, though.
Unprecedented to raid a former president's office on every single level. And I think when you say prosecutorial misconduct, you put all these pieces together, and we're doing this in real time with the viewers as well at home. You look at his statement, where he, all of a sudden, all the way down in the middle of his statement, he talks about them breaking into his safe. What's the difference between this and Watergate? They don't want me to run in 2024. But all the way down, you get this sort of line about Hillary Clinton was allowed to delete and acid wash 33,000 emails after they were subpoenaed by Congress. Absolutely nothing has happened to hold her accountable. She even took antique furniture and other items from the White House. That probably sums up his defense, right? If he has classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, and that's what really this is about, it's the whataboutism defense, which you can decide whether it works in the court of public opinion. Never worked for me in kindergarten, but with certainly his supporters and even some very Trump skeptical Republicans, it goes a long way.
And what do you make of the DOJ and the FBI staying so silent tonight? Does it show sort of a basic misunderstanding of the cynicism and the mistrust that's already going on in this country right now?
It's completely confounding to me. Democrats will say, well, this is proof that the DOJ and the FBI are continuing the rule of law and their adherence to the rule of law. Restoring trust in institutions, though, can be done without necessarily adhering or violating the rule of law also. And it's kind of shocking that they aren't better coordinated, at least the Department of Justice saying something other than no comment. Mayor Garland will have a press conference tomorrow. This is part of a long-running investigation into and here is the search warrant.
Right.
There's nothing that requires them to keep this search warrant under seal.
But President Trump is going to be speaking about it.
Well, he already has. And there's nothing that requires this search warrant to be kept under seal, which I think is interesting that at the very least they could release the search warrant that allowed the FBI in there and never violate any of the rule of law sort of tenets. And that would provide everybody a lot more transparency at the very least.
All right, Leland, thank you. And we do want to bring in NewsNation political contributor Chris Steyerwalt now. Chris, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Chris, what do we know at this hour, and what are you hearing from your sources right now?
Well, the first thing we should say here is that we don't know of any violation of the rule of law, and we don't know what the Justice Department has. And with much deference to my colleague Leland, we should be very cautious. This is serious business, and it's serious business in both ways. This is a time of serious gravity for the country. We have never had a former president's home raided and his safe broken into. But then again, we never had a former president so brazenly defied, to our knowledge, the record-keeping requirements that we have so that we can have a clear understanding of history. As we have seen in the aftermath of Donald Trump's effort to steal a second term, the efforts to cover up or to secret what went on have been troubling, and I have spoken certainly in private to Republicans who, while publicly silent, are deeply concerned about the way in which Donald Trump has conducted himself, not just in the sort of self-coup that he engaged in, but also in flouting all of these things. Trump has a pretty clear strategy in matters like this. He invoked Watergate. So the Nixon term is brazen it out. Brazening it out means to say, we're going to be so reckless. We're going to be so in the face of our opponents, and we're going to dare them to take action because they may discredit themselves with their action. Clearly, Trump's hope here is going to be that Merrick Garland has overstepped or made a mistake, and we don't know, but that he will again be able to say, another hoax. They came for me again. There's in the musical Guys and Dolls, Big Julie, who is he's the vehicle for the whole story. He comes to town and a reporter says to him, what's your record? Aren't you worried about your past record? And he says, my record is perfect. 36 arrests, no convictions. And Trump's attitude in a lot of this stuff is they keep coming for me, but they can't take me out. So if Merrick Garland is undertaking this kind of an action, this unprecedented kind of an action, he better have the goods.
Well, and if brazen it out, as you were saying, is his tactic, doesn't this silence from the FBI and the DOJ just play right into that?
Well, they have a job to do, and they can't be Donald Trump. Donald Trump can be Donald Trump. And to say that the Justice Department should be out, on Twitter and doing all of this stuff, Merrick Garland has done a very good job, in my estimation, in dealing with the competing pressures that he has faced as Attorney General. His party and the political pressure inside the Democratic Party for Merrick Garland to put Donald Trump's head on a pike and give them the vindication that they have wanted all along has been very real. And people like Adam Schiff, Democrats in Congress, have made no secret of trying to squeeze Garland and make him and push him into action. On the other hand, if you let a former president get away with flouting these rules and paying no attention to it, then, speaking of Leland's point about the rule of law, what do you got then? So Garland has been in a very difficult position, but fortunately for us, he was a accomplished prosecutor. He was a respected on all sides for his work as an appellate judge. And I hope for everyone's sake that he has proceeded judiciously, carefully, cautiously, and earnestly in this case. And we can all take a breath and we can see what he's got tomorrow.
Yeah, what sticks out to you? I know there are a ton of questions, more questions than answers right now, but what sticks out to you about all of this so far?
Well, I mean, never have we ever. Donald Trump said that this was, I forget whether he said it was third world or banana republic or whatever adjectives he used to describe this. Well, he's right in the sense that we are getting closer and closer to a very dangerous point, which is in the United States, we have never had the next administration criminally prosecute the previous administration. This is something that, as you'll recall, when Donald Trump was running for president, he promised to jail Hillary Clinton and that he would imprison and that he would, and all of those things. His own Justice Department did not allow him to follow through on those. But we can think back before that to when Barack Obama was under serious pressure from Democrats to prosecute, if not George W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and others who were part of either what they called enhanced interrogations at Guantanamo Bay or the Iraq War itself. And Barack Obama said, no, we can't start doing that, because the truth is, once you start prosecuting former presidents for things that they did when they're in office, Donald Trump is right. That would be how you would get to a third world kind of banana republic status. Question here is, what can you let a former president get away with, especially a guy who has already demonstrated a very reckless attitude when it comes to the Constitution and a very loose association with the truth? This is tricky, tricky business. And I would just encourage everyone, every patriotic American, everybody who loves this country, to say a little prayer, hold it together, see what happens. Don't jump to the next conclusion. Don't follow the bouncing ball. Don't get ahead of it, because there's a lot that's going to play out here.
Yeah, Chris, I think you rightly point out what we don't know far outstrips what we do know, and it's a much longer list. You made a great point that I'll put it a different way. If you're going to shoot the king, you better kill him. If you're going to go for something like this, you better have the goods. Classified information, there's a lot of different rules about it. It's certainly a serious matter. Documents inside a safe behind a wall that's guarded by the Secret Service has its own associated feelings. If you are going to break the precedent of prosecuting a former president, if this is the moment we do this in our republic, what is the political requirements on Merrick Garland beyond simply proving the who, what, where, when, and why of some federal crime?
My assumption is not that Donald Trump is going to be prosecuted. I still think that is not the most likely scenario here. I would imagine, and again, and I don't want to engage in excessive conjecture, but my guess here would be that this is not about Hillary Clinton's abuse of secrecy rules and her mishandling of state secrets kind of thing, and that the concern somehow is that whatever's in that safe would get out, but that whatever is in that safe is of material interest to other cases or relevant things. And that it's not about that the documents are unsecured or something like that, but that Trump doesn't have a right to those documents and what's in those documents. Here's what we know from Trump as president. They made a blanket declaration after the Democrats took over the House of Representatives that they would no longer comply with any subpoena. And we went through the last 2 years of Donald Trump's administration where they just didn't. And Trump's own relationship with the Justice Department, we know what Bill Barr, his last attorney general, and by the way, his first attorney general, Jeff Sessions, had to say about Donald Trump's relationship with the truth and Donald Trump's relationship with following these sorts of rules. So my guess, and this is, again, just a guess, is that this is an intermediate step to something else, that they had reached an impasse on this question about handing over germane documents, and finally that Garland, and this is just a scenario, that Garland had to finally say, okay, well, we'll just send them in. We'll have to send people in to collect these documents if you're not going to comply.
again, from a political perspective, not necessarily the legal one, because neither of us are lawyers. When you think about the decision to keep this search warrant sealed, that is made at the prosecutorial level, what has to be the considerations inside the Justice Department over the willingness and the necessity to keep it sealed versus what is going to have to be, I think, from your perspective, just looking at it, there's going to be an overwhelming and continually growing amount of political pressure, media pressure, to at least give some idea over what was in these documents or what the purpose or reason for this search warrant was, isn't there?
Yeah, I think Garland will have to tomorrow lay out where they are, why they are there. This is a big deal. So I would say proportionality is probably the political concept to follow here. Whatever they did should be in proportion to whatever Trump was doing in terms of withholding documents or failing to comply or all those things. So this is about proportionality. We had to do this because he would not do that, and putting it out there. In terms of keeping it secret and all that other stuff, one of the real advantages that Garland has here is that Trump has not declared his candidacy for president yet. This is very helpful for Garland. And by the way, as the clock is ticking down on when Trump was going to declare, and he teased it and then said yes and then pulled it back. As soon as Trump is a declared candidate for president, it changes the dynamic on this stuff, because now, as James Comey and Loretta Lynch found out with their terrible mishandling of the criminal investigations around the 2016 presidential campaign, it's different. So doing it now has some real advantages for Garland.
We've got 30 seconds, but I just saw a couple people say, well, if Trump wasn't running already, if he was not sure that he was going to run, this just ensured that he would, for the very reason you point out.
Well, I think Donald Trump was running no matter what, because I don't think he can afford not to run. So I think here we go.
All right. Well, is your no one had FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago on their August 22 bingo card.
Bottom row.
All right, there you go. Thanks, Chris. It's good to see you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.